Vanakkam. Any involvement of the median nerve may sometimes be very obvious clinically and carry all the classical descriptions that are described in textbooks. But sometimes it needs a very good, elaborate and meticulous clinical examination to unearth the involvement and the extent of the involvement of the median nerve. And only this thorough clinical examination will allow a proper planning of the management schedule. This video deals with not only the methods of clinical examination and testing of the median nerve function, but also the scientific reasons why the particular tests are done and how they are done. We shall deal with the complete clinical examination of a patient with a median nerve palsy under the following headings: the causes or the commonest conditions that can result in a median nerve palsy, the method of presentation of the patient in the different situations, the systematic procedure of examination of such a patient, the relevant investigations that we need to order, and what we expect to learn about the function of the median nerve in the different investigations, and how to arrive at a diagnosis about the level and nature of the injury to the median nerve. And there is a separate section to highlight the features of compression syndromes and the clinical features of these conditions. The commonest causes of median nerve palsy are trauma, compression syndromes, chronic infections like Hansen's disease, and sometimes even tumors. Trauma can result from injury to the upper limb at the level of the elbow or proximal to it when it is called a high median nerve palsy, or distal to the middle of the forearm when it is called a low median nerve palsy. In the case of trauma resulting in a median nerve injury, we need to consider the history of the trauma, whether the patient is presenting in an acute situation or in a delayed manner, the duration since the injury has occurred, and the type of injury, whether it has been a sharp injury, crush injury or an avulsion injury, when more amount of injury to the median nerve is expected, and also the concomitant injury which can occur in most of the situations like injury to the tendons, the other nerves, especially the ulnar nerve, and concomitant fractures. The next common cause of median nerve palsy is the entrapment neuropathy, which could be either a Pronator syndrome, an anterior interosseous syndrome, or a carpal tunnel syndrome. These conditions typically present with an insidious onset but have different symptoms in different syndromes and different findings in each syndrome, which will be dealt with later in this video. Hansen's disease is also a cause of median nerve palsy, typically involving both the median nerve and the ulnar nerve. In Hansen's disease too, the presentation is with an insidious onset. The patients usually presenting with weakness or ulcers that have already developed on the hand, sometimes with the history of treatment for the Hansen's disease, and as already mentioned, usually associated with ulnar nerve involvement. Tumors around the nerve or in the nerve can cause involvement of the median nerve, as in this example of a young girl with an embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma of the median nerve at the level of the axilla, presenting with a high median nerve palsy. In such patients with tumors, the presentation could be either due to the tumor or weakness and inability to use the hand, and evidence of progressive disease. When a patient presents with a median nerve involvement, the first important step would be a thorough inspection of the hand. We need to look for the position of the thumb, evidence of wasting of the thenar muscles, ulcers, skin appearance, scars, and active opposition movements of the thumb. Normally, the thumb is placed at a level higher than the plane of the palm. In a patient with a median nerve injury, typically the thumb is at the same level as the palm and supinated, that is facing forwards. This was sometimes called as the ape thumb or the simian thumb, but these terms are no longer used. In a patient in whom there is a concomitant ulnar nerve injury also, typically the thumb lies in the same plane as the palm, and in addition there is an acute flexion at the interphalangeal joint of the thumb. This is because the thenar muscles are totally paralyzed and the only force acting for movement of the thumb is the external force, that is the long flexor the flexor pollicis longus. Next, we look for evidence of wasting on the hand. When the muscles are paralyzed, they go in for an atrophy. This is evidently seen in the thenar eminence. As seen in this patient, the right hand is normal, whereas the left hand there is a median nerve palsy, and we can make out clearly the wasting in the thenar area. When the patient starts using his insensate hand for work, he can develop ulcers due to inadvertently holding very hot objects. This will typically be seen in the index finger and the middle finger. Along with motor and sensory deficit, there will also be a loss of autonomic function of the involved nerve. One of these changes is the degeneration of the fat pad in the pulp of the fingers. The normal rounded appearance of the pulp of the index and mid fingers becomes more sharp appearing in a patient with a median nerve palsy. The skin also appears shiny and smooth due to the loss of papillary dermal ridges and also appears dry. We also need to look for the telltale scars, the scars of the original trauma or injury or scars of surgical intervention. The position and the nature of the scar must be noted. When the patient is asked to clasp his hands together, the index finger will not get flexed in a patient with a high median nerve palsy, and this sign is known as the pointing index sign. This is because the flexors of the index and mid fingers, that is, both the FDP and FDS have been paralyzed, but in the middle finger some amount of flexion is possible because of the common muscle belly of the flexor digitorum profundus with the ring and little fingers. This lack of flexion of the index and mid fingers in a patient with a high median nerve palsy gives the appearance of what is known as the benediction sign, because it seems to remind us of the hand sign used by the Pope to bless people. Next, we can ask the patient to do active opposition of the thumb to the other fingers. This movement can be graded according to the Kappanji grading system. This grading is from a score of 1 to 10. When the patient is able to touch radial side of the proximal phalangeal region of the index finger only, it is known as grade 1. The grading progressively increases as he is then able to touch the radial side of the middle phalanx of the index finger, then the tips of the index, middle, ring and little fingers, then progressively down, that is the distal interphalangeal joint crease of the little finger, the proximal interphalangeal joint crease, the metacarpophalangeal joint crease of the little finger, and then lastly the distal palmar crease. Now we shall do the clinical tests for muscle function, starting with the pen test and then the individual muscle tests and special tests in compression syndromes, which will be dealt with separately under the heading of features of compression syndromes. The pen test is done to test the palmar abduction movement of the thumb. This is first demonstrated on the normal hand, and the patient is asked to touch a pen which is held parallel to the level of the palm, and the patient is asked to lift his thumb up to touch the pen. This is then tested on the affected side, and while the patient is doing this, we need to palpate for the contraction of the underlying muscles to confirm that it is the abductor pollicis brevis that is acting. Next, we need to individually test each and every muscle innervated by the median nerve. In doing these tests, we need to assess whether the muscle is acting, and at the same time we need to confirm that the muscle is acting by palpating the increased tone in the tested muscle, and at the same time confirm that no other muscle is acting and causing a trick movement, and what is the power of the tested muscle under the MRC grading. To test the pronator teres muscle with the patient sitting and elbow in flexion, he is asked to pronate the forearm, and at the same time the muscle is palpated and the power is also checked. To test the flexor carpi radialis, the patient is asked to flex the closed hand at the wrist. At the same time, we need to note a few points. 1. Is there an ulnar deviation of the flexing wrist which could be caused by the flexor carpi ulnaris? Second is, we may sometimes be able to see or just palpate the taut tendon of the flexor carpi radialis. The power of the muscle should also be checked. The palmaris longus can be tested by asking the patient to attempt to oppose the thumb and little fingers and then flex the wrist against resistance. The palmaris longus again may be palpable when it is contracting. We shall now check the method of testing the flexor digitorum superficialis of the fingers. We shall start with the middle finger. The flexor digitorum superficialis acts on the proximal interphalangeal joint to flex it, but there is another tendon, that is the flexor digitorum profundus, which can also act on the proximal interphalangeal joint to flex it. To prevent this flexor digitorum profundus from acting, we ask the patient to keep the palm of the hand facing upwards flat on the table, restrict the index, ring and little fingers, and then ask the patient to flex the middle finger. This is because the flexor digitorum profundus belly of the middle, ring and little fingers is common. So when the ring and little fingers are restricted, the flexor digitorum profundus to the middle finger cannot act, and whatever flexion we get at the middle finger proximal interphalangeal joint is due to the flexor digitorum superficialis alone. This, however, must also be tested. Once the patient flexes the middle finger completely, he is asked to maintain the flexion, and the tone of the distal interphalangeal joint must be checked. It must be relaxed and loose. If it is tight, that means there is some trick movement and the patient is still using the flexor digitorum profundus to flex the interphalangeal joint of the middle finger, because the FDS is not acting. In a similar fashion, by restricting the middle and little fingers, the ring finger FDS can be tested, and by restricting the middle and ring fingers, the little finger FDS can be tested. But the FDS of the index finger cannot be tested in this fashion, because the FDP of the index finger is a separate muscle. Here, the patient is asked to flex the proximal interphalangeal joint, and the tone of the distal interphalangeal joint is checked to make sure that the FDP is not performing the flexion of the PIP joint. The flexor pollicis longus muscle can be tested by supporting the proximal phalangeal region of the thumb and asking the patient to actively flex the interphalangeal joint. The flexor digitorum profundus of the index and middle fingers can be tested by stabilizing the middle phalangeal region of the fingers and asking the patient to actively flex the distal interphalangeal joint. To test the pronator quadratus, it is not enough to ask the patient to pronate the forearm. This is because the pronator teres will most probably act. To negate the action of the pronator teres, we put the patient in supine position, acutely flex the elbow, and then ask the patient to pronate the forearm. This can be done while the examiner resists the movement. Now we come to the important movement of opposition of thumb. We should first understand this complex movement. It actually consists of a sequence of three movements. The first being abduction, which is both radial abduction and palmar abduction. Next being flexion, and at the same time pronation. In a pure median nerve palsy, the palmar abduction, which is done by the abductor pollicis brevis, is lost, and pronation, which is done mainly by the opponent's pollicis, will be lost, but flexion will be preserved because one head of the flexor pollicis brevis is innervated by the ulnar nerve. If there is a combined ulnar nerve palsy along with the median nerve palsy, all the three movements will be lost totally. If there is a combined radial nerve palsy, the radial abduction portion of the opposition movement will be lost because of the paralysis of the abductor pollicis longus. So when testing the opposition movement in a patient, we need to compare with the opposite side and at the same time palpate the abductor pollicis brevis, which is the first palpable muscle radial to the first metacarpal bone. There are trick movements that can occur, like in this patient in whom opposition seems to be present, but there is a loss of tone of the abductor pollicis brevis, which means that the median nerve is involved. To test the first and second lumbrical muscles which are innervated by the median nerve, the patient is asked to keep the index and mid finger straight and flex only the metacarpophalangeal joints. Resistance is applied to test the power of the lumbricals. After a thorough motor examination, a sensory examination needs to be done, which will show loss of sensation on the volar aspect of the thumb, index, middle fingers, and the radial aspect of the ring finger. If the palmar cutaneous branch of the median nerve is also involved and the lesion is proximal to this branch, there will be a loss of sensation over the thenar eminence also. To confirm the diagnosis of the median nerve lesion and to get additional information about the lesion, we need to do certain investigations. The commonest investigations that will be useful are ultrasound, MRI, nerve conduction studies and electromyography. Ultrasonography will be useful for detecting lesions of the median nerve at the level of the elbow forearm where compression neuropathy is very common. Here the anatomy can be delineated at different levels and the probable cause of compression of the nerve can be found. But ultrasound is most useful in diagnosis of carpal tunnel syndrome. The triad of palmar bowing of the flexor retinaculum about more than 2 millimeters beyond the line connecting the pisiform and the scaphoid, flattening of the median nerve distal to the carpal tunnel, and enlargement of the nerve proximal to the flexor retinaculum can be detected. This is the most sensitive and specific criterion. The normal cross-sectional area of the median nerve at this level is given at 9 to 11 square millimeters. MRI is also found to be useful at the level of the elbow forearm where the probable cause of the compression neuropathy can be detected, as in this example where an accessory head of the flexor pollicis longus is situated deep to the median nerve and pronator teres muscle, which could probably be the cause for the compression in this patient. However, in carpal tunnel syndrome, MRI is not as useful as ultrasound, but it can be indicated when there is a disagreement between clinical and electrophysiological finding, in patients not responding to conservative therapy, in post-operative recurrence where there could be insufficient sectioning of the flexor retinaculum, and the identification of associated lesions like ganglion or lipoma causing the increase in the pressure within the carpal tunnel. Nerve conduction studies play a very important role in the diagnosis and follow-up management of median nerve palsies. The primary criteria to be analyzed are the wave amplitude, latency, duration, and conduction velocity. Please click on the link shown above to see more about the use of nerve conduction studies in nerve injuries. Of particular importance are the prolonged latencies and the slowing of conduction velocities in carpal tunnel syndrome. Electromyography also plays an important role in testing the electrical activity of individual muscle fibers and motor units. It consists of both insertional and spontaneous activity, and the potential pathologic findings are increased insertional activity and the presence of fibrillations and fasciculations. The fibrillation potentials are the most sensitive indicator of motor axon loss, seen especially in chronic nerve compression, and they are seen long before there is any evidence of muscle weakness. In severe cases, reduced motor unit potential recruitment can be seen. Now, based on our clinical findings and the investigations that we have done, we need to take a decision about the level of the lesion. To understand this better, we have listed out the complete motor and sensory supply by the median nerve. If all these are involved, it is a high median nerve palsy. If the pronator teres, palmaris longus and flexor carpi radialis are spared, it is most probably a pronator syndrome. If in addition the flexor digitorum superficialis of all the fingers are spared, then the lesion is in the level of the middle of the forearm, just proximal to the anterior interosseous nerve branch. If there is only a motor deficit involving the flexor digitorum profundus of the index and mid fingers, the flexor pollicis longus and the pronator quadratus, the diagnosis is anterior interosseous nerve syndrome. If all the thenar muscles, the first and second lumbricals are paralyzed and there is a loss of sensation on the radial 3.5 fingers and the radial side of the palm, it is a low median nerve palsy with the lesion being proximal to the branching of the palmar cutaneous branch of the median nerve. But in a carpal tunnel syndrome, there will be no loss of sensation on the radial side of the palm, as the palmar cutaneous branch would have been spared. Now let us see some of the findings of a high median nerve palsy. The lack of flexor pollicis longus and the loss of FDP of the index finger, the loss of proper opposition of the thumb with demonstrable weakness of the abductor pollicis brevis muscle, the loss of action of the flexor digitorum superficialis muscle of the ring finger, middle finger and little finger, and the absence of flexor carpi radialis function manifested by the ulnar deviation on wrist flexion and the absence of palpable tendons of the FDS of the flexor carpi radialis. Similarly, clinical examination in a patient with a low median nerve palsy demonstrates the wasting at the level of the thenar eminence, trophic ulcer on the middle finger, and lack of proper opposition between the thumb and the fingers. Even though the thumb is able to touch the little finger, we must note that a pulp to pulp pinch or a tip to tip pinch is ideal. Here it is a tip to side pinch, that is, the tip of the thumb touches the side of the terminal phalangeal region of the little finger. All the clinical signs and demonstrations that we have seen so far are also seen in compression syndromes or entrapment neuropathies of the median nerve. However, these syndromes have certain peculiar features and certain specific tests that can demonstrate the underlying problem. The main syndromes are the Pronator syndrome, anterior intraosseous nerve syndrome, carpal tunnel syndrome, and what is known as the double crush syndrome. The Pronator syndrome was first described in 1951. It was thought that the only reason for the median nerve compression in this syndrome was between the two heads of the Pronator teres or the FDS. Later it was found that the ligament of Struthers, the bicipital aponeurosis, the fibrous band of the Pronator teres, FDS arch or anomalous muscle like the accessory head of the FPL could also cause this syndrome. The etiology for this is either repetitive and strenuous work with the arm in pronated position, and more common in computer workers and manual laborers. The male-female ratio is equal and both sides are affected equally, but the motor symptoms appear earlier than the sensory symptoms. The patient usually presents with volar forearm pain, loss of fine motor skills, loss of key pinch, and a sense of clumsiness tending to drop things after holding them, and paresthesia of the median nerve innervated areas, which occur quite later in the progression of the disease. There are usually no nocturnal symptoms. Apart from the findings of median nerve palsy, we also need to demonstrate clinically the presence of compression at the pronator site. This can be done by the compression test. With the patient in sitting posture, elbow held at 90-degree flexion and forearm kept pronated, pressure is applied over the pronator area for a period of 2 minutes. If there is pain or reproduction of symptoms like tingling sensation on the fingers occur, the test is positive. A provocative test called the Pronator teres test can also be done. Here again, patient is in sitting posture with elbow at 90-degree flexion. Patient is asked to pronate the forearm and the examiner offers resistance. At the same time, the examiner starts extending the elbow up to the straight position. If at any time during this test the patient perceives pain or of tingling sensation, the test is considered positive. The anterior interosseous nerve syndrome, otherwise known as the Kilo-Nevin syndrome, has involvement of the anterior interosseous nerve only, which is a motor nerve. There is no sensory involvement of the median nerve. The cause of this syndrome could be an anatomical cause like a tumor or a ganglion pressing on the nerve, or a Parsonage-Turner syndrome, where there is bilateral anterior interosseous nerve signs caused by viral brachial neuritis. Here in this syndrome, the OK sign will be pathognomonic. Because the flexor digitorum superficialis of the index finger is acting while the flexor digitorum profundus of the index finger has been paralyzed, the patient cannot make a O sign with the thumb and index fingers. Instead, the distal interphalangeal joint collapses and a typical O cannot be formed. The commonest compression neuropathy of the median nerve is seen in the carpal tunnel syndrome, where the patient may present with a numbness and tingling in the radial fingers and thumb, typical nocturnal pain in the thenar eminence, paresthesia triggered by actions involving sustained wrist flexion and extension like reading a book, driving, use of a keyboard or mouse, and a weakness of the thumb. Bilateral symptoms are also common in carpal tunnel syndrome. Since generalized conditions like myxedema and even conditions like pregnancy can cause an increase in the pressure within the carpal tunnel, the diagnosis can be made by clinical examination to demonstrate the paralysis of the median nerve at the level of the wrist, the scratch collapse test, Tinel sign, and provocative tests apart from electrodiagnostic studies. If there is focal nerve entrapment at a particular area, there is an area of skin allodynia at the level of the entrapment. Applying a stimulus over this area of nerve compression while the patient is exerting bilateral external shoulder rotation, transient loss of muscle resistance resulting in the arm collapsing can be seen. Both limbs are tested simultaneously and the patient is asked to externally rotate the shoulder. The examiner offers resistance against this, and at the same time the area of suspected nerve entrapment is gently scratched or stimulated and the test is done again. Normally, if there is no entrapment, this power of external rotation will be maintained by the patient. If there is an entrapment of the nerve at a particular site, stimulation over this area will lead to the collapse of the arm. The tinel sign can also be elicited by gently percussing over the median nerve at the carpal tunnel. It is positive when the patient describes an electric shock sensation in the median nerve distribution. It is less specific when compared to the scratch collapse test. The tinel sign is elicited by tapping gently from distal to proximal along the course of the sensory branches of the median nerve. Certain provocative tests can be done to bring out the compression of the median nerve at the level of the carpal tunnel. The Phalen's test is done by asking the patient to push the dorsal surface of the hands together and hold the position for about a minute. This will produce symptoms of median nerve compression like tingling sensation in the radial 3.5 fingers. This is because this maneuver increases the pressure in the carpal tunnel. In the reverse Phalen's test, the patient maintains a position of full wrist and finger extension for a period of 2 minutes. In patients with an evolving carpal tunnel syndrome, this test will cause symptoms of median nerve compression. The reverse Phalen's test is said to be more effective in bringing out the symptoms of median nerve compression than the Phalen's test because the increase in pressure in the Phalen's test is only about 4 millimeters of mercury at the end of 2 minutes, whereas in the reverse Phalen's test, the increase in pressure is to the range of 42 millimeters of mercury at the end of 2 minutes. The carpal compression test or the Durkam's test is done by applying pressure over the area of the flexor retinaculum on the palm. This should be maintained for a minimum of 30 seconds. A positive test is when paresthesia is noted in the distribution of the median nerve by the patient. A negative test is when there is no pain or any other symptom even for 3 minutes or longer. The sensory tests like the Sams-Weinstein's test is the most sensitive sensory test for detecting early carpal tunnel syndrome. Innervation density test, that is static and moving 2-point discrimination for assessing the functional nerve regeneration after nerve repair is also useful. The theory of double crush syndrome was described in 1973. This states that axons that have been compressed at one side become especially susceptible to damage at another site. Examples of double crush syndrome are cervical radiculopathy and median nerve compression, carpal tunnel syndrome occurring along with the Pronator syndrome, or when ulnar nerve is involved, ulnar nerve compression both in the cubital and the Guyon's canal. I hope you liked the video. I enjoyed making it. Please click on the shown links to see more about the basics of the median nerve anatomy, and do not forget to subscribe to keep connected with the latest in learning hand surgery.